computer. Okay, we're off and running. And if you want to watch this class again, we hopefully will figure out how to make this available to you. Or if you miss the class and to catch up, we'll have this. Okay, Steve and Diane are going to share with us a little bit this morning. And I don't know why my...
Hey, Tom, we're here.
Okay, I don't know why
It's
my...
been
I don't know why my
an
slides...
adventure.
I want Diane to share first.
Okay.
And then, Steve, we're going to come to a point just fairly quickly.
Hi,
We
everybody.
want to bring you in.
We've been having, am I on?
Yeah.
Okay. We've been having issues like everybody else with our connection here. But I've been studying the,
Sit down.
okay, the issue of George Whitefield and John and Charles Wesley, their unity that Tom brought up last week. And it has been fascinating. I have to say, I've learned so much stuff about these guys who were so influential. And basically, knowing a little bit of the history, George Whitefield was kind of a outsider. He was not wealthy. His parents were innkeepers in Gloucester, which is, I'm not sure how far it is, but it's outside of London. And John and Charles Wesley were they were wealthier and more influential, went to private schools, but they were about the same age. The Wesleys were just a few years older. And you remember when Tom last week talked about the importance of buildings, building these cathedrals and stuff gave muscle kind of to the gospel during the 16th century, probably before that too. But these guys lived, well, they were in the 16th century, but these guys lived in early 1700s through the late 1700s. And anyway, basically, without taking a lot of time, what I found was that their disunity was more cultural, personality based. Rather, it was couched in theological terms, but really it was that John and Charles Wesley, it seems to me anyway, were represented the old guard, sort of. They were more, they probably wouldn't call themselves this, but stuffy, methodical. They liked the structure of the old church, sort of. And then there was Whitefield, who had studied drama when he was a little guy. And then he was only 16 when they all met. These three men met in Cambridge in England to study. Whitefield was the very lowest rung. He was on a scholarship when they got there, and he probably served the Wesleys. He was a server. He would help the wealthier students get their food and bathe and all the stuff that they did. And but that's when there was an order. I forget the name of it, but kind of like a Bible study, kind of like Bible talks back in Crossroads. He was invited to that and very, very influenced by it, and eventually converted by the Wesleys, basically. And he always showed them a lot of deference. They were honored sirs when he would write letters to them. And all of that. And so, but basically what happened was Whitfield was a much more dynamic, his oratory was amazing. It'd be like what we felt in going to the movies, or, it would evoke a lot of emotion, things that they weren't used to seeing in religion. And so he quickly, at 20 years old, became much more followed, much more influential. He would have these surprising crowds follow him. So he was 20. When he was 20, well, he came back when he was 25, so it must have been he was 23. He went to the States, the colonies back then, and that began the Great Awakening here. And it was amazing. He was 25 years old, and he would have thousands of people. It was like the latest, greatest. Everybody heard about him. The things that I read said that 80% of the population of the colonies would have seen him or heard about him. He was like royalty, the next greatest thing to royalty. They would know his name. And during that time, he read Calvin doctrine. And before that, he was obviously more influenced by the Wesleys, who were not Calvinists. But, and so he became influenced by that. And in 2 years, by the time he went back to England, he was already, they were having these big theological clashes. It was, like I said, couched in theology, but it was mainly personality, because George Whitfield had some kind of gift in oratory that just drew people to him. When he came back, they wouldn't let him speak in their fancy places of worship. So he said, okay, I'm going to have it out in the open. And he spoke to coal miners, and he spoke to people who were kind of not so well thought of, let's say. And he would have thousands of people gather to hear him. And so there was this kind of rivalry during their 20s, when they were 20 years old. And but later, the quotes are just amazing about how they mellowed. Each one of them, each one of the parties mellowed with age, and began to see that, these are not essential things. I respect these. Each one of them would say they respected each other's hearts. And so, to make things short, eventually, John Wesley preached George Whitfield's funeral. And they had these really warm correspondences. And in the latter part of their lives, they realized that the things that were dividing them were not as important as the things that unified them. And it was just very inspiring. And I just keep wanting to read more. They were pioneers of the highest order. They still influence us today. Tom will be interested in knowing that at the end of George Whitfield's first American foray, 23,000 people gathered in the Boston Commons. It was larger than even the population of Boston at the time, when he was 25 years old. And it just sounds like such an electric, supercharged time that Satan tried to get a foothold in. But they each were motivated by the humility that their Savior showed, and maintained their unity based around him. So anyway, I don't know if that piques anybody else's curiosity like it did mine, but my goodness, I think we could get a movie out of this.
Wow. Thank you, Diane. Thank you. Diane's research there just shows you that we're only hitting the high points when we are doing this overview of church history. When you dig down deep, sometimes there are some really great stories. And as I tried to answer Diane's question last week, I realized that I hadn't dug that deep into this story, and I appreciate her going down into it. I mean, many people would say they did have a significant theological difference. In some ways, Calvinism and what we've come to call the Arminian view, which is the view we would have, are so drastically different. How could you ever work together? But somehow they found Jesus such a compelling figure that they knew they could meet at the cross and overcome their differences. But thanks, Diane. And Steve, we're going to bring you in just in a minute here. I've got to go back to share my screen again. I wanted you to be able to see Diane a little better. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see the screen again. So we've talked here about quite a number of different groups. Go back to that screen. You know, beginning Reformation with Luther, and we've moved on to talk about the Anglican Church, and then the Anglican Church in America, Baptists, the Methodists. I'll mention just a couple of churches here we haven't really talked about. The Church of the Nazarene, they're sort of a break off. They kind of trace their roots back to the Methodists, then through a group would be called the Wesleyan Holiness, and then the Church of the Nazarene comes out of that. Then the Anabaptists, to the Swiss Brethren, to the Mennonites. Pentecostalism, I've kind of got it out here on an island a little bit by itself, because the Pentecostals kind of came from a number of different places, had a significant beginning with an event out in Los Angeles more than a century ago, and out of the Pentecostal movement came the Assemblies of God, one of the larger denominations coming out of that group. The Dutch Reform led to the Church of Scotland, and then led to the Presbyterian churches in colonial America. And then, if you want to work our kind of roots in, this is where our roots start, right down here, with the Restoration churches, mainly coming out of the Presbyterian churches. But we're going to do a deeper dive into the Restoration churches here. Probably not get to it too much today, but we will before we end, because this is where our roots directly go back to these churches that we're saying, look, all this confusion, all this division, let's go back and try to restore simple New Testament Christianity. That didn't prove to be as simple as some thought it would be, but this is where we began. Now, somewhere in here, we ought to mention, two other continents. One is Africa, and that there were mission efforts to reach back into Africa. And I showed you earlier in earlier Christianity, there was the Ethiopian church that spread from there into other places in Africa. But there were more serious and or more deliberate efforts to reach the different countries in Africa later on. And this is where Steve's going to come in and share a great story with us. But here's just some important things to mention. 1460s, you see, that's about the time Columbus comes to America, a little bit before. Pope Pius, there were a number of Pope Piuses. I don't remember which one this was. There were 10 or 11 of them, but they sent missionaries, particularly the Franciscans, those that followed St. Francis of Assisi, went into Africa. 1483, the Portuguese make converts in the Congo, and I know we don't spell Congo that way today, but it was spelled that way by various people at that time. And so later in the 15th century here, the Dominicans go into West Africa. Then in the 18th century, we have a woman, Beatrice Kipa, who starts a separate church from the Catholic Church, and she ends up being burned at the stake as a heretic. And then the one man I was going to mention to you, and Steve's going to tell us about another man, was Lot Carey, who was an African American who led a group from the United States back over to Africa to the country known as Sierra Leone. But Steve, come on in and tell us about your man. Steve, we're not getting any.
Hey, sorry, I had
Hey,
it muted.
there you go.
Can I share a picture, Tom?
Oh, no, we're not set up to do that.
Let me see.
I don't think.
Okay, let me try.
Okay.
Where did it go? So you're not seeing it, right?
No, I maybe have to stop share. Well, no, you've taken over the sharing.
I've done it. So how do I share my screen?
Go down to the where your microphone is and your video camera is, and then right beside the video camera, there's share content.
Okay, let's see. Oh, well. I'm not seeing it. It's not that important. So, um, so I'm giving you I'm giving you the power back, Tom. I was just going to show a picture of this guy, but his name is George Lyle, and he was a slave, an African American slave in Virginia. His owner later moved to the Savannah, Georgia area, and the thing about him, I mean, he actually is before the guy Lot you mentioned. He doesn't go to Africa. He actually goes to Jamaica. But let me just share a little bit about him. I mean, William Carey is called the father of the modern missionary movement. He was English, and he went to India, and this guy George Lyle actually left America and planted the gospel in Jamaica a full 10 years before Carey moved to England. Moved to India. The most famous Baptist missionary early on his name was Adoniram Judson, and he left the United States to go to Burma 30 years after George Lyle goes and plants the gospel. So this guy's very early on. So he was baptized at the age of 23 by the white minister Matthew Moore. His owner Henry Sharp was a deacon in the church. So he was baptized by this guy, and he continued to go to this white Baptist church, but primarily was preaching to people in the slaves on the plantations. And after his conversion, he was ordained as a Baptist minister May 20th, 1775, a year before the Revolution, becoming the first ordained African-American Baptist preacher in America. So, I mean, this guy's preaching, converting slaves. He actually starts a church, the first Bryan Baptist Church, that is still in existence today. And then his owner, Henry Sharp, was killed in the Revolutionary War. And maybe one of the reasons why this guy was not that well known or not favorably mentioned in United States history is because his his owner was fighting for the English, and so after he was killed, his heirs tried to make uh, George Liele, who Henry had given him his freedom, so his heirs tried to make him a slave again. He was imprisoned, but he was able to show the documentation that he had been given his freedom and was allowed to leave. And so when the British were defeated and left, he left with the British Army. He had been befriended by a colonel, and left and went to Jamaica with his family. He had his wife's name was Hannah. They had 4 children, and so they go to Kingston, Jamaica in 1782. And one of his main reasons for leaving was because he was afraid that if he stayed in the South, he would be re-enslaved by the things that were going on at that time. And so he moves there. He begins preaching there. He builds a little church building. But one of the interesting things they had their baptismal services in the river, and so they were very public. And because of this, he got in trouble and was charged with preaching sedition, was thrown into prison. He was acquitted of these charges, but he created quite a stir there. And one of the things that he did, he actually created churches that were multiracial. And so that was another one of the kind of unusual things that was going on there. But he converted a lot of Jamaicans, a lot of slaves, and according to this one author, his ministry had a spiritual impact in that slavery was done away with in 1838, and they attributed that partially to his ministry in developing these multiracial churches. So thousands of people were converted, and not only did he convert a lot of people there, but he also raised up and sent out other missionaries that went to Nova Scotia, Sierra Leone. Be interesting to see if Lot might have been converted by this guy. But anyway, just I didn't find anything about that, but it just dawned on me. But anyway, this guy, he had an amazing history. He was born a slave. He was freed, and became a Christian, and just spent the rest of his life preaching, and spent the most of the rest of his life preaching there in Jamaica. He died about either 1820 or 1828. I saw 2 different dates on his death, but I mean, super inspiring. Just these things that we don't ever hear about as you study history. So that's my George Liele story.
Amen. Great. There are a lot of those kind of stories out there. Appreciate Steve bringing that one to our attention. And that's interesting. It will be interesting to study the connection between him and the guy that I had on the slide here, the Lot Carey. If you find any more about that, Steve, you can come back in and share that with us later. It would be
Okay.
interesting to see if Carey was a convert of Lyle's as a result of his ministry. Okay, well, for today, we'll just briefly take another look at the African continent here. The eyes that you see are in countries that are predominantly Islamic, and the C's are in countries that are predominantly Christian of one denomination group or another. And you can see that the northern part of Africa is dominated by countries that now follow Islam, and the southern part of Africa is much more Christian, I think the TRs that you see are tribal religions that still have a lot of sway in those places. But and in some countries like Nigeria, you have uh, you have both Christian and Islamic, and you have a lot of tension between those groups. Okay, somebody came on, and I need you to mute your microphone. And real quickly, and I'm sure Steve could give us a lot more about South America and the history of missions than I'm going to be able to give you. But from the 1500s to the 1800s, there were many efforts to bring the message of Jesus in some form to South America. Those were predominantly Catholic efforts. The Spanish and the Portuguese, both come from countries that were predominantly Catholic. And as the conquerors went in to kind of take over these lands, it's interesting, they were always accompanied by missionaries, and usually either Franciscans from the Order of St. Francis or the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, and they would come in, and the conquerors, the conquistadors, would come in and take over countries, and then the clergy, Catholic clergy, would come along behind and work on converting the people, and then building the different. It wasn't usually a cathedral at first, but the different buildings that were associated with Catholicism. Just one of the interesting things to note about Roman Catholic Catholicism, and this is true to some degree of Catholicism everywhere, but there was a blending of Catholic Christianity with the local culture and a lot of the local beliefs. And so Catholicism kind of absorbed some of the local things that the local people wanted to hold on to, but they found a way to blend the two together. And that's still true today. You still find a lot of examples of where the Catholic people would still go back to their pre-Catholic days, their pre-Christian days, and are still doing some things that they've mixed in with Catholicism. Okay, now we're going to turn, and all we're going to do today is just kind of headline it and let you know we're going to go there next time. But we're going to move to North America, and we're going to look at two major periods. Now, one of those periods actually started in England, and Steve's already referred to it, and then it moved into the American colonies. And then the second period came after the Revolution and after the United States had become its own separate entity. But perhaps somewhere along the line, you've heard of the Great Awakening. And then maybe you've heard of the Second Great Awakening. They were about 80 years apart. The Great Awakening did begin in England, and Steve and Diane actually talked about Whitfield and the Wesleys, who were a part of that awakening in England. And they were called the Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening because they did involve large numbers of people. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere in England at the time, and then in the colonies, without hearing about these things. They attracted huge crowds of people. That one reference Diane made to the Boston, is it the Public Gardens? Is that where the Boston Public Square? I had not heard about that great assembly, but it was that kind of thing that went on. And these things changed people. There were a lot of people that began to go in a very different direction after these movements. Steve at some point, or maybe it's Matt, I get these Browns confused, but it talked about the book In His Steps by Charles Sheldon. Somehow that book got connected with the Second Great Awakening. So there were very influential things that happened. But I think instead of trying to go very far with it today, we'll just wait till next time to start, and we'll look in some detail, not long, but by next time you will see that our own movement, if you trace it back, really comes out of the Second Great Awakening. There's a place in Kentucky, uh, not too far, somewhere between Louisville and Lexington, called Cane Ridge. I know we've got our own Cane Ridge here in Nashville, Cane Ridge High School area of Cane Ridge. But there was a Cane Ridge in Kentucky, and one of the leaders, instigators of the movement we're still a part of, uh, was Barton W. Stone, and he was there at Cane Ridge. And certainly Alexander Campbell, who would later connect with Stone, and the movement they led would be called the Restoration Movement. And in more modern day historians' terms, it's called the Stone Campbell Movement. But it comes out of the Second Great Awakening. And so if you're looking for some of the more immediate events that impacted who we are today and has a definite connection with our thinking, we'll get into that more starting next week. Okay, well, let me stop there and let's just open it up and see anybody else. It's great to hear about some studies going on with Thaddeus. Great to hear about Mary studying online. Just reminds you, in fact, in some ways, if you're using a format like the one we've got here or Zoom that a lot of people use, you can do some very effective things with some diagrams and that sort of thing that can list the scriptures out. So let's just all keep looking for opportunities. Sheila and I went for a walk yesterday around the block. We didn't get all the way around. It turned out to be colder than we thought it was going to be. When we got back home, I said, "Hey, let's go across the street and ring the doorbell of our neighbors and thank them because they do several things for us from time to time." My next door neighbor had brought me a big load of toilet paper and paper towels the other day. He'd gone to Costco. And so I've decided that the coin of love in our day and age is toilet paper. So I said, let's get one of those big packs. He brought us a pack that had like 6 packs in it. And so I said, let's go across the street to Sandra and Tony and just take them a package of toilet paper. Boy, 6 weeks ago, that would have been the last thing in the world I would have thought about doing. But we were able to reach out to them, and Tony came to the door, and it was kind of like, what is this? Toilet paper. He said, well, it is a most wanted item these days. And so we gave it to them and told her we just wanted to know how much we appreciated her. She's always coming over and getting our trash can and bringing it back up the driveway for us. But let's just keep thinking of ways we can reach out to people. But anybody got any good stories or good news you want to share, or any needs to share with us? Does anybody need toilet paper?
Hey, Tom, this is Steve. Can you hear me?
I can, brother. Go ahead.
So no connection between those two guys. By the time Kerry was converted in Virginia, and he was converted after George Lyle had already moved to Jamaica.
Okay.
So no connection between them, but they were both Baptist. I mean, And again, it's just so interesting how our history, you hear about the first Baptist missionary was Adoniram Judson that left the United States and, to be a missionary. But actually, these guys were both before Judson. And so really they were the first uh, Baptist missionaries that left the U.S. to go other places, one to Jamaica, the other one to Africa.
Okay. We're going to
So
see
it's
next week that a great number of separate Baptists, if you remember the separate Baptists that we talked about a little bit, a great number of separate Baptists became part of the Stone Campbell movement or the Restoration movement to go back to the New Testament. So we'll talk about that connection next week.
Cool. The other just good piece of good news, there was a college student baptized last night in the Memphis church. And
Amen.
So I know there's not a, what's that? He's a PhD in chemistry, Diane said.
Wow.
So anyway, they're continuing the fight there in Memphis. And, Steve and Rebecca Warmer sold their house. I mean, well, they have a contract on their house and have a contract on a house in Memphis and are making their plans to move as soon as possible.
And if you're a Facebook user, just search for Steve Warmer and Rebecca Warmer on Facebook, and you'll see a video that Steve and Rebecca made this week to send to the Memphis church about their excitement about moving there. So it's going to be great to have the Warmers back in Tennessee. Anything else? Barry, anything from the elders' corner, ministry corner you want to make us aware of?
Well, I can share about our Hope chapter here in Nashville. Put together about 12 baskets with mints in them, and had a poster that said, "Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your involvement. Thank you for your engagement." And said, "We give this basket of mints for your enjoyment." And so it's taking those to the hospitals around, and had some church cards that we put in there, but we did that on behalf of the church.
Great. You guys get it, right? Encouragement, enjoyment,
Involvement, commitment,
Investment.
investment.
Yeah.
There's 4 minutes. There's 2.
This is Nathan. Can you hear me?
Yes, Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad y'all explained that. I saw that in the last, I guess, was sent out, and I didn't know the backstory, the minutes. So that makes it clear. Are y'all having trouble hearing me?
A little bit.
A little bit?
Not real clear.
Okay. I don't know what I can do here to make that better.
You're okay. You're okay.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to tell everybody that, for about 4 weeks or so, right after the quarantining started, our contribution just went way down, and that was understandable. I think we were averaging around 11,000 a week for a few weeks, which was off our budget by about 6,000 a week. We were getting about 2/3 in. The last 2 weeks have been remarkable. I just am amazed at the generosity of our church. The last 2 weeks, there's been 23,000 given and 25,000 given. A lot of people are giving online that never have given before that way, and a lot of people are mailing checks in or having checks direct from their bank. And a lot of people the last 2 weeks have basically made up what they missed for those 4 weeks or so. And Anyway, it's just, as the treasurer, it's very encouraging to see that. But I just thought it would be encouraging for everybody to know how committed people are and just how people are just pulling out all the stops to make sure they can give and support the ministry. So
It's amazing.
that.
Amen. Well, Nathan, while you have your mic open, why don't you go ahead and close us out with prayer?
Okay. Father, it's been great to be together today. Father, I just pray that we will really take in these things that we're learning, let them affect our heart, Father. Just think about a George Whitfield and the kind of impression that he made on society just as a single man. Father, I pray for another great awakening in our country, and maybe this coronavirus will be a part of that. But it would be great for those in the future who study church history to see that there was another great awakening in 2020. Father, we just pray for you to continue to work through all of these circumstances. Father, that your will be done. Father, help us to trust in you and know and understand your will as best we can and really live it out in our lives. I pray for each one that's on the call, each one that's not on the call, Father, for whatever reason, God. I pray that needs to be met, and Father, use us to meet those needs as we see them and are able to do so. Thank you for Tom teaching, for Diane and Steve teaching today, and this time of being together and connecting. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay, well, I promise you that we will do some testing and we'll try to have the little glitches worked out before next week's meeting. But I hope you were able to see everybody on the screen together. I don't think we were able to do that with the other one. I never did figure it out if we could, but I sure enjoyed being able to look at so many of you at one time today. Okay, you guys can open your microphones and have chaos.
Chaos, chaos.
All right.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Linda.
I just want to say
Ah,
everybody.
hello, how are you? I had to leave and come back. Wanted to get the sound back in, but I managed.
Hey.
Bye,
I
everybody.
enjoy seeing you all.
Sisters, I just
Yeah, I
want to
like
give a shout out to let you know my lesson will be up this Saturday. We had very difficult technological problems getting that uploaded, but it will be shown up this Saturday.
Okay.
We missed you,
Yay,
Debbie.
Debbie.
All right.
Debbie.
Very good.
I thought
Stay on
Debbie,
till the end.
Very good.
Till the end.
Debbie, I thought you said you had theological problems getting it up.
Technological. Maybe I hope it's not theological problems. Tom, watch it. Let me know.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, Lisa and Don.
Hi.
Bye.
Hey, Salamando.
Bye.
Hey, it's Jean.
We missed you.
Hi, Lisa. Hi, Ben.
Yes,
And that,
Mary.
I
Eddie.
love
That's
it.
great, Mary.
Mary.
That works
Hey,
good to hold that
that's
up.
a really good picture.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Bye.
Thank you, Diane. Nathan for sharing.
Thank you,
Bye.
Diane. Thank you, Steve.
Bye.
Bye.
I'll talk to
Love
you
you
later.
guys
Miss
so
Linda.
much. A link to your video.
Love you too.
Oh, Janice, did you get on in the car?
There.
It works in the car.
Oh,
Look at
about
that.
that.
Yeah. I'm hoping I'll be able to get a link to the video.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll be working on all that.
Okay.
Gene,
What I got was really good.
always good to see you,
All
Gene.
right. Hi, everybody.
Gloria said
Goodbye.
she said a little bit. She have on the phone. So we'll keep working on that. Hi, Jean.
Hey. Are you going to the funeral?
We didn't do this church thing. We're going to the graveyard
Okay,
so I can keep my distance.
good job.
What funeral is that, Janice?
Henry's second cousin
Oh, I'm sorry.
was a coach down in Mount Pleasant at the high school for many, many years.
Oh, I'm so sorry. They didn't die of age.
Well, he had surgery and was doing great and came home and all of a sudden started having those symptoms and passed away. So we don't know.
Oh,
So
So,
sorry.
but he coached baseball, football, and basketball. So all those students
Wow.
were showing up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, so sorry.
Bye, everybody.
We're passing your house, Paula. I'm waving at you.
Oh, okay. I'm waving at you too. Love you, Jean. It's always so good to see you.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.
How's the weather there?
Beautiful.
We had a pretty day yesterday. It was a little cool, but it was pretty. So it's a little gloomy today, but it's getting there. You know, I'd rather have it this way than really cold or really hot. So
Right. We've got warm weather, but a nice breeze.
yeah. Okay. That's perfect. Oh, a little envious, but I love your tan.
Oh, thank you.
Are you able to get your hair cut or just cut your own hair?
Do what?
Are you able to get your hair cut?
No, I cut on it.
It looks good. I need to cut on mine.
I cut a little yesterday.
All right. Love you.
Love you. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Good.
Janice. Love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Gene, can you hear me?
Yes.
I see the picture behind you that me and you were in the room with Ray
Yeah.
Jean. That brings back such memories.
There he is. He's with us.
I know.
He's
I was
with
on-
us all the time.
I was on one side of the bed and you were on the other. He gave that big smile and that thumbs up.
Yeah.
It's just a memory I'm going to always have.
Yep. And
I love you and I loved him so much.
we loved you too. Just feel grateful he's not having to suffer. So grateful.
I know. Diane, you still on here? Guess not. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Eddie.
Tom, did Sheila have a good birthday?
Yes, I did. I guess it's
I think Tom's gone.
It may just be you and me, Gene.
It may be. I'm glad y'all are just going to the graveyard so you're not in close contact with a lot of people.
Exactly.
Yes.
Hey, Gene,
Yeah.
I think that's a wise decision.
Mm-hmm. And I will keep my 12 feet distance apart.
we're still here.
And I made me some sock masks.
Okay.
What?
So,
Sock mask.
Oh.
okay. You can tell I don't.
See you.
Huh?
Hey,
I
Gene,
said, we'll see you.
Hey, Gene, we're still here.
Oh, okay.
I think with this program, if I leave the meeting, then I think it cuts it off for everybody. So I was doing other things, but I left it on. I heard you. Yeah,
Okay,
she had a great birthday.
good.
Amy and Bethany and Corey had all worked out for her to connect with a lot of friends from the past
Mm-hmm.
and other places. And so we did one of these Zoom calls, and she had a friend on that still a close friend after being in high school, or not high school, but elementary school.
Wow.
She was
Good.
on with a lot of other people from our churches, so Sheila was excited for her to get to meet all of them.
Even in this life?
That's good.
Yeah, so it was a good time.
Well, y'all have a good rest of the week. I love you all, and I'll see you next week, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
All right.
Are you expecting people to come rushing back to the beaches this week?
No, the beaches are still just open for exercise. So nobody, it's not crowded, and people are doing really good at keeping distance and being respectful to others.
Okay.
And that's good.
Good.
I was supposed to come home, but I told somebody, I don't know if it's worth coming home when you can't see anyone. You can't go anywhere.
Right.
So I may just stay here until things clear up a little bit because I don't really want to get on an airplane.
Yep. Yep. I hear that sometimes a flight has 5 or 6 people on it.
Right.
So, yeah, you could probably connect just as well from there as you can being here.
Probably so, because I don't see anybody here other than, just passing outside.
Yep. How do you do groceries?
I go to the store, and I go to the store for one of the ladies here that's in a wheelchair, and I'm taking her cats to the vet tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Oh.
So I get out some, but I wear my mask and try to stay a good distance from people.
They have pickup if you wanted to use it.
She tries to use the pickup, and she'll have $100 order and may get $20 worth. If I go far, I can usually get her list. So evidently pickup is not giving priority to outside orders as much as people who come in.
Wow. I've actually heard of, I don't know that this has happened here in Nashville, but I've actually heard of stores that have closed down except for pickup and delivery.
Oh.
Yeah. So,
Well, now that's what the restaurants do here.
yeah.
Only pickup and delivery. So about twice a week, I'll go get takeout and bring it in. Then Connie and I just cook here.
Yeah. Sheila and I haven't even checked with O'Charlie's. I assume they're still doing their pickup. You used to be able to often pick up there. I assume they still are doing that.
Most of the places are.
You want to see Jean? Sheila's going to come over.
Tell her to come over.
Look at that.
Come on over.
Fitness.
Come on over. Get in front of the screen.
There she is.
Hey,
Hey, Sheila, how are you?
doing good.
Great. Good to see you.
You too.
On our walk
Tom
yesterday.
said you had a good birthday.
Yes, I did.
That's wonderful.
Our
Got
walk
to see
yesterday.
a lot of old friends.
Yeah. Well, it was a surprise to me. They took me to, I don't know where it was. Where was it? It went.
We actually didn't go. We just stayed here at home.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway,
They just sat her down in front of the computer, and all of a sudden, all these people were.
Video conference like we're doing.
Yeah,
that was
exactly.
that was fun.
And
That's
they called it a crazy hat party. So everybody's supposed to wear a crazy hat.
Okay. That was fun.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. And my best friend from high school was there. It's so weird though, because I think, oh, I want to see Susan, give her a hug. And I didn't get to see her much at all. And it just wasn't a lot of time.
Right,
So,
right. Well, it's time for y'all's lunch, so I'll say goodbye and let y'all go have a bite of lunch.
Yeah,
Love you both.
Love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.